Welcome to Commander Pop Culture, a place to gather magical information with some laughs, might I add. So you want to build Felix the 5 boots? Well, I have a list for you. This is a $100 deck. Lately, I feel like I've been challenged by Reddit. Most people feel like a budget list isn't a budget unless it's $100 or less dollars. So I'm going to try and force myself to build only decks that are $100 or less. It'll be an interesting challenge. I never forced myself to do that before. Usually I come pretty close to $100, but I want to try and honor some feelings about what a budget is. So if you don't know what Felix does, should a creature you control deal combat damage to a player, it causes a trigger ability of permanent control the trigger. That ability triggers an additional time. So it's like a Panharmonicon for combat damage. There are two ways you can build this. You either do like a bunch of permanents that put blanket combat abilities on everything, like a Coastal Piracy, or you play a bunch of creatures that have evasion already on them that have their own combat triggers.
Best of both worlds.
And get those doubling trigger effects that way. Because I'm on a budget list, that is a limiting factor in when I could play. Blanket effects for combat are normally pretty expensive, and I also didn't want to deal with jamming a bunch of cards that provide evasion like levitation. It would have cut into my creature count. So that's how I came up with the idea of like, maybe there's enough evasive creatures in these three colors where I don't even need those things. So that's the gimmick of this deck, is every creature that has a combat trigger on it can't be blocked in some way. AR's Oathsworn, for instance, has Menace, and when it deals combat damage to a player, if it has 4 fewer counters on it, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then if it has exactly 4 counters on it, you get to search your library for a card, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. If Felix is in play and this has 0, you will need 2 combats to get the tutor effect. Because it says exactly 4, you can't be at 3 and attack with this with Felix in play, because then you'll miss out on the tutor. I mean, you'll make her bigger. You'll go to 5 counters and she'll become a 7/7. So, I mean, it's not too terrible, but I thought this would be a fun tutor effect. I've never played AR's Oathsworn before, so we're gonna give it a shot. Looter Ilkor, this is just a looter with Shadow. Deals damage, you get to draw, then discard. Seeing that card first is really significant because it gives you more information before you make a decision. Malcolm the Scoundrel, very similar to Looter, but with extra benefit. It puts a counter on itself, and then when it has 4 chorus counters on it, the card you discard, you will be able to cast that card without paying its mana cost. Basically, you're discarding without any drawback in that scenario, and you could cheat stuff into play. Suspicious Stowaway, another looter effect, only it's a werewolf, so it could turn into this. And then on this side, it just straight up gives you a card. Caustic Wasp, on damage to a player, you get to destroy an artifact a player controls. Cold Eye Selkie lets you draw a card every time it connects. Drana Liberator Malakir, this is pretty dope. You can, because it has first strike, if none of your other creatures have first strike, this will connect first, and her trigger will go on the stack before anything else does. So everything will get 2 counters thrown on your entire board beforehand, and that just makes out for a fast game.
The girl with the ponytails, you are dead.
Emissary Despair, whenever it deals damage to a player, that player loses life for each artifact they control. So your punishing artifact strategies are very popular in Commander, because if you're not in green, you depend on artifacts to fix your ramp package. And every deck, doesn't matter what kind of deck it is, should have a ramp package in it. And the likelihood of someone having multiple artifacts in play when this connects with someone is pretty good. Fairy Bladecrafter, on hit, you get to put a counter on itself. Should this die, you get to cause someone to lose X life, you gain X life, where X is this fairy's power. Pretty scary. What I also like about it is you could target anybody with that ability. It doesn't have to be the person that you've been beaten on with it. List of the Sunslayer. I like this for the flexibility, and because it has first strike and death touch, no one wants to block it because you will deal damage first and kill their stuff first. So most of the time they're just going to let this thing hit the player, and in that scenario you get to blow up an enchantment or draw a card, lose a life, or remove 3 counters from a permanent. I would imagine that if people throw sacrificial blockers in front of this, it's just strictly so they don't lose one of those 2 permanents that this particular messes up, because it does mess up planeswalkers. And another thing is that you could target any permanent with counters on it, so you could hit one player for free and then remove counters off of someone else's planeswalker. Needle Spectre. This thing, when it deals damage to a player, they discard that many cards based on the amount of damage you deal. I have a bunch of ways to scale up creatures. If you target this, then you could make everybody empty-handed eventually. Shadow Mage Infiltrator. This draws you a card every time it connects. Thief of Sanity. This lets you steal cards off of people's libraries. You go 3 cards deep and you get to make a decision from there. Trigon Predator lets you blow up an artifact or enchantment. Blizzard Spectre, this lets you either bounce a permanent to someone's hand or forces them to discard. It's nice and flexible. Grima, Saruman's Footman, this lets you hit people and steal a instant or sorcery from the top of their library. It lets you go until you hit one of those 2 and you get to use their spells against your opponents. Okam Adversary, I love this guy. He is a 2-mana basically Death Toucher that whenever he deals damage to a player, draw. And again, no one wants to trade with a 2-mana Death Toucher, so you should be getting a fair amount of card advantage off of this. Schema Thief, it deals damage to a player. You get to create a token that's a copy of an artifact that player controls. Like I said earlier, point-wise, is that everyone runs artifacts, and if they're running anything scary, you get a scary thing too. With Felix, you get to make multiples. One of the drawbacks about the colors you're in is there aren't a lot of Haste Enablers, so to dodge that tempo issue, I included as many budget-friendly Haste Enablers as I could. Sirach is one of those. If you meet Formidable, you need 8 power or greater in play to give something haste. Perfect in this deck. Toski, I'm glad to see that this has fallen in price. This was out of my budget once upon a time, and now it's fallen back down. Get to play that again. One of the best deal damage draw effects because it itself is a creature. It's doing something for you and can't be countered, can't be killed easily. Pretty sweet. Dazzling Sphinx. When this deals damage, you get to exile cards from the library until you exile an instant sorcery. Kind of like Grima, just a mana more and with more power to it. Demon of Wailing Agonies. I didn't know this card existed until I was brewing this. If you control your commander, he gets +2/+2, and whenever it deals damage to a player, that player sacks a creature. So you're bopping people for 6 and making them sack 2 things. Pretty dope. Orange Frost Fang, an oldie and a goodie. Gives all your attacking creatures Death Touch, so again, puts people in that Okam Adversary kind of situation, but with everything. Oger Keslem, this is a card advantage creature. On damage, you get to look X amount of cards from the top of your library based on the amount of damage you've dealt, and you get to put a creature card or a land from among them onto the battlefield, so you get to segue a lot of costs. And the other plus about this guy is if he dies, you turn him into land, and then you can turn him back for 3 mana and tapping this if you have 10 or more permanents, which shouldn't be a problem in a game of Commander. I would say by the time you curve out and play this, you probably have ascended and met that requirement. All right, now we're in our kind of Haymaker win condition kind of stuff. Necropolis Regent. This does apply a blanket effect. Whenever damage is dealt to a player, you get to put that many +1/+1 counters on those creatures. A very scary snowball effect. Psychico, Mother of the Summer. I've never played this guy. I didn't know this existed until Commander Masters came out, and I was like, I thought this was a reprint set, and it is. This came out a long time ago in Kamigawa and just slipped under my radar for years. I've been playing Magic for, I think, since 10th edition, and I do have a pretty sweet memory base for Magic cards and just never encountered this, I guess. Whenever a creature deals damage, you get green mana equal to the amount of damage you dealt to someone. This should help with the mid-ranginess of the deck. It will enable you to cast multiple spells a turn. Sharding Sinks, this is another win condition. Whenever an artifact creature you control deals damage, you make one evasive flyer, and then it exponentially gets bigger with every passing damage trigger. Because you get 2, you'll have 3 flying artifacts for your following turn, and then that becomes 9 the following turn, so it's very exponential. Sirach and Goreclaw, this is another Haste Enabler. Gives your non-token creatures haste and get to put a +1/+1 counter on them, and it gives all your creatures trample. That ability is kind of not necessary since every creature in this package already has evasion, but you care more about the haste part. Rexiel the Risen Deep. I haven't played one of these in a long time. It has Island Walk and Swamp Walk. Probably the 2 most popular colors in Magic is blue and black, so you should find someone to hit with this. You get to cast an instant or sorcery from that player's graveyard without paying its cost, and then you exile it after you do that. And for another win condition, we have Giant Adage. I haven't played a Giant Adage win condition in a Coon's Age, so I'm pretty excited to bring this out and let it see daylight again. On damage, you make a token copy of this. 7/7s with trample are pretty scary. The rest of these are just quality of life kind of stuff. Writ of Return is a bit of a fun card. Cipher is really good with this deck because it adds a combat ability to your cards or your creature cards. You cast this spell and then you imprint it onto something. It's like adding an ability to a creature, and it's just a combat damage trigger. And basically you get a free copy of whatever card you ciphered on it. In this case, it's Rite of Return. Lets you return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield tap. The crux of your game plan is going to be board wipes. So I added some recovery options in here, and Rite of Return just seemed like a fun synergistic way of doing that. And then we have Creeping Renaissance also to help you deal with board wipes. Something I want to talk about, since board wipes will be what makes or breaks you. Counter magic is really effective because it's very non-conditional. You just counter the spell and it's done on the stack.
Get that weak shit off my track!
Versus like Rapid Vigor, it's a little more riskier. You know what I mean? Like if it's a Farewell on the stack, then Rapid Vigor isn't going to do you any good. Or if it's a Toxic Deluge, not going to do you any good. But it's still mana efficient enough for me to want to try. And it's also very cheap at 81 cents. Lavaur Boots is new, coming out in this upcoming set. I don't care so much about the ward. I care about the CMC and the equip costs. And it's super cheap to enable haste. Strixhaven Stadium, this is a mana rock that's also a synergy. I've never won with this before, but you put a goal counter on this, and then every time a creature deals damage to a player, you put another counter on this, and then if you have 10 or more counters on this, you kill the player that you've dealt combat damage to. If you have multiple creatures connecting with multiple opponents, you could potentially kill all three of them in one go. Indomitable, I didn't want to include all the Coastal Piracy effects. I only wanted a handful of them. I particularly like the ones that can double as creatures and do stuff for you. This is a vehicle, becomes a creature, so you get those combat triggers. One with Nature, on damage with the player, you get to search your library for a basic and put it into play tapped, then shuffle your library. This should help you ramp quite nicely. For 1 mana, it's a really good enchantment. The only thing that kind of is a bummer about this, it's a little expensive for $4. It beats Kodama. That's like $24 or $28. I wish I could feature it in the deck, but if you have more money to spend, I highly recommend. And it triggers when a modified creature hits. This is just less conditional, more vulnerable, but more mana efficient. So 2 pluses, 1 negative when comparison to Kodama. Not a bad deal. Oubliette and Song of the Dryads deal with commanders that you need to keep off the table. Nature's Will, a really fun card. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal damage to a player, you untap all your lands and tap all their lands. If you could abuse the stack, you can cast instants or activate abilities in between the untap triggers. But this is, I imagine, will be untapping your stuff so you can play stuff main phase 2. But if you have instants in your hand, you can get some extra value blended into this card. Contest Mission, I include this one because if you should lose all your creatures and you draw this up, you could cycle it for 2 mana. The lands are all for mana fixing. A lot of them come in untapped, so that's a nice benefit. The only things that don't come in untapped, they tap for all 3 of your colors, or you could get all 3 like Evolving Wilds kind of stuff. And that's the deck. I hope you all enjoyed. If you liked what you saw, you stayed this long, subscribe. I'm going to be doing a lot of deck techs from this set. I did Obeka beforehand, and I'm going to do at least 10 more after this. You go to my community tab, and I have actually got 3 polls going on. I love this set so much that I want to play 12 different commanders, so that's a tall order for me. I'm going to build 12 budget decks that are all around $100 or less, and I'm going to feature them on the channel and play them on Moto. I'm going to do them in order based on votes. Obeka was in the lead, followed by 5 Boots, and I'll just go down the line. You could still influence the polls.
You gotta fight for your right to vote!
Influence the order that I play these commanders come when the set releases on Moto on next Friday. So that's the 19th. Hope you all enjoyed. Everyone take care now. Bye.